And we are live. What's up? What's up? It's your man Sean P coming in live. This is the Sean P Experience. Right back at it, like I promised you, man. A lot of great shows lined up. I'm booked until like June, so these
Dude.
shows are coming in rapid fashion, man. And today I feel very blessed because most times on the show, a lot of my guests are from around the country, and I'm blessed to have that. But it's nothing like having somebody from right in the backyard, somebody right here in the same area,
Yeah.
same experiences, the same culture to really, really understand each other, man. So I have a amazing Louisiana-based author, Micheal Allen. Zell, how you doing today, my brother?
Man, I'm good. Look, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Yes, sir.
Look, one of the things, basically, when things with the book slow down and also summer hits, I need to catch up on some of your previous shows. I've
I
realized
appreciate
very, very quickly, but you are. That's difficult to catch up on because these have been like rapid fire,
it. They
like
are
one
rapid
right
fire.
after another.
They are
Yeah,
rapid. I got a show coming up Thursday, matter of fact. Like it's really happening, and whenever God bless you, it overflows. They say, right? The cup
right,
overrunneth.
right, right,
So
right,
we asked to just get one yes, and then five yes, five come
right,
behind
right. Yeah, you
it.
can't plan that. You gotta go
You
with it.
can't.
Yeah,
You can't.
yeah,
What's going on? My sister in the chat, Billy Edwards. I appreciate you always here, always in support. Thanks for the chat. I love my audience, man. So let me give you a proper official introduction.
got you.
I have New Orleans-based novelist, screenwriter, freelancer, and playwright Micheal Allen Zell in the building, my man.
Great. Thank
I'm gonna ask
you.
you a question, bro.
And we got Sean P right here. Actually, right
I
here.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate it. I want to ask you a question real quick, just rapid fire, right? So you
Yeah.
have that screenwriting background and things you've done, journalism and freelance and stuff. What advantage did that give you when it comes to writing the actual novel? What's your advantage of having that background when it comes to the other side of writing?
You know what? If we go back even further, so just over a decade ago, I had a short story that I developed into a play. So I actually went to a play. It was by Samuel Beckett, and it was, I can't think of what to call it other than a disguised monologue. So literally, there was a character in a huge mound of dirt who delivered most of it, and then her husband Willie basically just crawled around and grunted and whatever. And this went on and was engaging for 45 minutes. And I thought it was the coolest thing. And I also thought, wait a minute, theater, and the crowd was just, wrapped. And I thought, but if I put this in a book and I wrote this book, I don't think anybody would buy it. And then made me realize, you know what? You can get away with more with theater because the visual component and the actors, the quality of that. And that was one of those things I was like, you know what? I have one of these short stories that's basically a monologue. I would love to kind of craft that. My approach, as you know, same as yours, my approach is always the worst thing somebody can say is no. So I reached out to a couple like Big Easy award winning actors. They were all for it, and what I learned from that by going to rehearsals is when you hear your words aloud, that was the first time for me. That was incredible. And it was a little scary because it all had to be on point for the actors and to be correct for that, right? So I think ever since then I've always had it in my head that okay, number one, you need to hear your words aloud, but also the different things that you can do, when it comes down to it. So fast forward to more recently, and so one thing that I can't go into is right before this, but I needed to basically get final draft and learn how to write for screen. I'd done plays before, and in fact, thinking of looking at Shadow to actually be for stage as well. But and then there's you got different ways you can do that.
Right.
What I found though for my first screenplay, so this is back mid 2022, it was a novelist version of a first screenplay, which means it was way too wordy. The actors would have gone crazy with the stage. I mean, it was too much. But then I realized, you know what? Add some exposition, change a few things around, tighten it up a little bit. This actually would make a really good novel, and that's where Last Shadow came in. But I advise for
Wow.
writers of
Wow.
any type. I see Miss Billy's reading one right now. I assume she means a script or a play. I would advise
I asked
anyone.
about crime fiction. She's reading
Oh,
the crime fiction right now. Yep,
I
crime
guess
fiction.
I get
Yep.
you. Yeah, I would advise whether you're writing plays or not, I would say any writer of any type should read different genres, plays among them, because it does take you out of what you're typically accustomed to. And most people that aren't in theater don't read plays, but
Right. Exactly.
I back
Exactly.
to adapt a short story. I always go by the approach. I think this is also the Sean P approach, which is if you want to learn how to do it or you want to do it, you just learn how to do it. You read
Yeah.
examples, you
Yeah.
figure it out, you
Yes,
you
right.
you you do all that. And so I read
Right.
I read August Wilson, I read Martin McDonough, I read as many
August
different
Wilson.
plays that I could just to get a feel for all that and like, okay, and I think I can do this. And that's my approach.
Now I'm gonna give
More or
you
less
some
than
background for those that
the listener.
don't know.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I have an acting background from high school, even through my adult years, being in stage plays and things like that. So of course, you go to a place, you do a screen reading, right? You read the script, and then you finally get your lines, your acting and stuff.
Right.
But during the pandemic, my big brother is actually a screenwriter. He went
Okay.
to Georgia State University for screenwriting and filmmaking and stuff. So he was trying to teach me how to write, screenwriting.
Yeah.
I was already 4 books in the writing books, publishing. But it's a whole different universe writing something for screen
Yeah.
versus writing like this.
But it
And
makes
so,
you sharp when you focus on. Sometimes people say five, but when you focus on 3 acts,
yeah,
the what their when you take their model, they being for screenwriters,
yeah,
and then you realize, oh, if I think of this and think of archetypes and things like that for fiction, it only
right,
makes you work better, right?
that's right, that's right. But I want to say it because it's different when you're an actor getting the script. It's different whenever you're writing a script.
Right.
And now I'm going like reverse engineering. 'Cause, most time in the script is giving you directions, it's giving you actions and things to do and emphasis on certain things.
Right.
So now to think about it and to write it that way.
Right.
So he had me write a paragraph, a regular paragraph, and now let's turn it into some actual script and
Wow.
make dialogue out of this thing. It
Yeah.
was an incredible experience, but it was
Yeah.
more difficult than what it seemed. Is my point. It was
Right.
difficult.
Right. Right. Right.
It was hard to do. It's not easy as it might seem to a person who's watching this.
Right, right. The other part of it is not just the actual script itself, but you go on, you watch anything streaming, movie, show, whatever. The first thing you're going to see is that one or two sentence. Any writer would benefit from a work before they start it, or a work when they complete it, to see, did I do what I started out to do? Is essentially, what's your log line? What's your 20, 30 seconds, 1 to 2 sentences to sum up the book? What's your treatment? Go through, what are all the themes? What is this? What is that? And then go through and edit. Because then once you have all that in place, then everything, especially if you do it up front, then everything just fits in there automatically. And anything that doesn't fit, then it's not for that. Or you have to change something a little bit.
Mhm. So it's funny you just said that about having that treatment, that summarization, right? I want you to give the audience a summarization of The Last Shadow. Give them a little elevator pitch to kind of
Sure.
put the appetite of what this book.
Sure.
Right.
So this is a New Orleans story, or let me say a contemporary New Orleans story about a young woman who is finding her way. Um, and she's an exceptional martial arts student who uses some of her skills to handle a situation on the street. And unknowingly, by doing so, she connects a crime boss who sees her doing this with her teacher. The two of them did not know each other as living in New Orleans, and they are both tied together by an incident that happened in the past. So let's see, book categorized as a thriller. Okay, Ms. Billy, I'm reading what you wrote there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
She's
but
reading on
it's
a book you mentioned earlier. It's called One of Us Knows.
got you, got you. Yeah, but Last Shadow is it's straight up crime fiction. It's a New Orleans story. It's a drama, but it's like it's like watching a cartoon when you're age 5 or age 25. If you want just the story, you got the story. If you want some of the Eastern philosophy, some of the martial arts elements, that's in there as well. It's
Yeah,
kind of however you want to take it.
yeah.
But I wanted this to be, I wanted this to be something for everybody. It's definitely not an action movie book. It does have 3 scenes in it, but it's more, it's kind of infused with that without giving too much away.
So this,
Sean, subject headers, things like that through it.
right. So this is what I want you to do.
Yeah.
This is an educational show as well, right? So you got crime fiction, you have thriller, You have suspense, these genres, right? So
Right.
give us what's the crime fiction genre? What does that mean when somebody says that? Mr. Michael, you still with us? I don't know if you got a freeze. Let me know in the chat. We got a freeze. I'm gonna try to refresh. I'm gonna try to refresh my thing. I think he hopped off and hopped back on. But while he's out, I'm gonna do a small commercial break until he's jump back in. Our pre-sale has started for the brand new book, Acting on Your Dreams and Visions. Acting on Your Dreams and Visions is going into pre-sale right now as we speak, as of today. Doing the pre-sale right now, man. Acting on Your Dreams and Visions, releasing in May, at the end of May, the release of the book. It's the book number 8 for me. My 8th publication being a part of, so proud, Kofi, Dr. Wade, the Griot Podcast crew. This is a Griot Podcast publication. Last year we had the modern day Griot and Griots. It was a Griot Podcast production. This is book number 2, the Griot Podcast. Hopefully, the thing is, as the seasons having the Griot Podcast, season 3, season 4, who knows how long it's going to go. Hopefully there's a publication to coincide with every season of the Griot Podcast. That's my goal, hopefully. So I'll put the link onto the description of this video. When we finish going live with the YouTube, I'll go to the descriptions and put the link in there. Anybody watching the YouTube later on, you can see it. You can scroll down, click the link, get your pre-order in. We're starting off at 15% off. So every book that we release, we start off with a sale, which is rare. Most books are released and then they go on sale 6 months to a year later. We always start off with the sale. So this will be 15% off on sale. And then after May 27th, I believe it is, we're going back to full price, right? So go out there while you can, acting on your dreams and visions, make your dreams a reality. Give me one brief second. I'm gonna check on our guest to make sure he's okay on his end, and I'll be right back. Sean P. Same with the Griots podcast. One brief second, y'all. One brief second. Boom, so we right back. I just checked on our guest. Our guest had a power outage where he is, a power shortage. We coming right back. Had to reboot the computer and all that good stuff like that. The electronics. Technology gonna do what it always does, right? I'm gonna keep it going until he returns back. On Thursday, is a book you might have seen at Target, Walmart, Barnes and Nobles, any of your best booksellers, Baldwin and Company. It's a book called Black Candle Women. Black Candle Women is a fictional story. I got the sister coming on to the show Thursday afternoon. Thursday afternoon, she'll be here at 4 o'clock Central Standard Time. She on the West Coast doing the California thing, California love. That's 2 o'clock her time. But 4 o'clock Central Standard Time, the sister coming on in. Black Candle Women. It's an awesome tale. I can't wait. I enjoyed the Black Cake, for an example. If you enjoyed the other Black Girl, if you enjoyed some of these other publications of that particular kind of genre, this book falls right in line with that. I would pair it right in between books of that nature. So go out there and check out Black Candle Women. Dealing with African spirituality, dealing with a little bit of the voodoo or the voodoo, depending on where you come from. It deals with different topics and things like that. So far, very good book. Highly advise it. The author has been very pleasant to work with. Our communication, our rapport. I love to always highlight that with these artists because sometimes we see these people in a certain light where they are, but you don't know how they really are. I love to always highlight when a person is a real good person. I love to highlight whenever a person is a genuine human being, right? You know, my man is right back in the building. Bad like you never left. What's going on, man? Right back, right back, right back. Mr. Michael.
All right, I'm back.
Yeah, you are. I can hear you. I can see you. You good?
There
You
we
ready?
are.
You
Man, I
good?
apologize. Windows decided to play with me, but it doesn't matter. But it doesn't
Hey,
matter.
hey, hey,
Look,
doing this show for all
but it
these
gave me a
years,
minute to think about the question. Yeah.
right?
So you were talking about genres.
Yeah,
So
crime fiction.
I'm not, you know what? I'm not here for algebra, but I got an
Okay,
equation for you. So if you take anything that I write, I don't know if anybody else picks up on it, but for me, this is what's in it. So number one, fiction and what's called literary fiction. So we're talking people like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, John Edgar Whiteman. To me, is the most underrated living American writer. Chigozie Obiama, um, Jose Saramago, people like that around the world, almost entirely international. Add to that crime fiction. The two writers that changed the game for me specifically were Chester Himes and Jim Thompson. Like coming across their books, and I had read different crime fiction authors, but those were the two of like, wait, you can do something and expand that quote genre on a level that I had not seen before. So that changed the game for me. And then the third component, I don't know if anybody picks up on this. The books that I write are contemporary, but the 70s vibe, like 70s music, movies, books, especially stuff that gets called like pulp fiction, stuff like that. I love all that too. So you take a little bit of all that. For me, that's what it is. Yeah.
okay. Now, ask you a question. Will Walter Mosley be considered a crime fiction writer? I like sort of kind of like detective
Well,
like.
right. The Easy Rollins books would be. I mean, the thing is, he writes in so many different genres because he's prolific. He's two books a year, every year for the last 30 years. So he does sci-fi, erotica, different genres. But I mean, every time there's a new Easy Rollins book, I'm gonna get that book. And to me, I would consider that crime fiction. But it's also, you make a key point, and I forgot this from my books, but I can say it from his books. Is it's also a social novel looking at the state of the city and why things might be the way they are, lifting up the rug, looking underneath. He does that on LA going back, I guess currently he's up in the 70s, and I'm doing that on New Orleans right now. And that was one of the motivating factors was I didn't see anybody doing that kind of thing for present day New Orleans. So when I started, hitting crime fiction specifically about a decade back, that was one of the key motivators. If somebody was already doing it in a way, something that I wanted to read, I probably wouldn't have done it in the first place. So I just
Wow.
operate by what do I want to read, when it comes down to it.
Okay, so let's kind of tease that a little bit.
Yeah.
So, why do you write, or why are you attracted to crime fiction? Let's talk about that for a little. How'd you get
Yeah.
that kind of
I mean,
spark to get
to me,
that job?
yeah. One of the key parts to me is sense of place. And New Orleans has such a strong sense of place. And I found myself realizing, well, actually, hold up. Let me go back a little bit. When I was a kid, I was the kid who read the Hardy Boys, read Sherlock Holmes, all those kid detective shows. I love that stuff. And my parents were very religious, so the only books we could have in the house that were not the encyclopedia, and believe me, I read that whole thing. Before going into school and having access to the library, the only books that we could have were religious books, and other than I think there's a mythology book I could have that, but I remember even back then there was a book called The Cross and the Switchblade, and it was about gangs in New York and finding the Lord and some of that stuff. But I love that one because you got like the street vibe and stuff like that. My parents didn't realize, they thought I was in it for like another thing, but even that I love. So that's always kind of been in me. But then what really got me thinking about the whole crime fiction thing for actually writing it was coming upon the Himes and the Thompson books. So it's like the Black Lizard Vintage Crime, series. But then also, just for the sake, I realized anytime I either want to, as they say, armchair travel, what would it be like to be in a place? Some people watch like a travel video on YouTube. I would look up like, oh, I want to visit this place, in my mind. What is that like? And if there were places I was actually going to, I found that I was gravitating to the crime fiction stories, because then I wanted to better understand a place that I was at more than a weekend or a week might be. And the crime fiction books always had the strongest sense of place.
Wow, you just brought something in my mind real fast, right? So,
Yeah,
me being an ex-military guy and traveling a lot in the military, even after the military, like whenever I did visit New York, for an example, I was there with people that's from New York. So I
yeah,
didn't go to Times Square. I didn't go to Statue of Liberty. I didn't do the touristy stuff. I want to see nitty gritty New York. We stayed in Harlem. We in Queens. We in Brooklyn. We in the Bronx. Like things
yeah,
you would see on a hip hop video montage. Like we're there. Things you seeing in these old 1990 New York movies. Like we're there. We're in those places, right? So any given place you go, I want to see the real heart and soul of the city. I could
right,
imagine the crime fiction will give you that more than some flowery, oh look, New York, Statue of Liberty, blah blah
right,
blah. I don't want that.
right, 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 right. Well, the thing with it is you can tell more stories about a place and people if you do it the right way. As I think back, here's somebody, this is not an active inspiration for what I do, but is an active inspiration for me for storytelling and this is the writer Richard Price. So Richard Price, and he's writing about New York. We know him more so because he's the guy who wrote Clockers, the Spike Lee movie. His influence is where The Wire came from, basically, with David Simon. And what did he do? What did they do with The Wire? What did they do with Clockers? What does Richard Price do with all his books? In the past, you would always get the perspective of basically the detective, the cops, whatever. He gave you the voices of everybody. You got the kids on the street. You got the cops. You got the politician. You got the longshoreman. You got the person who's working 3 jobs and taking the bus just trying to get by. I think a lot of generally fiction or crime fiction as well, it's giving you often one voice. Crime fiction allows you to do more of a range if you do it the right way.
Man, this is good, bro. This is why I love doing this show. Besides just hosting it and talking to these authors, like I'm really getting education too, right? When you said what you just said about that, I'm thinking about I'm watching the TV series recently, The Shy. Have you ever seen that show yet, The Shy?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
So
but I got to tell you, the first 2 seasons, I thought that was as good as it get. I felt like it went in a different direction after that, but I still watched it.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
I'm in season 2 right now, so
Okay.
don't spoil it for me.
I'm
But
not
I'm
gonna.
only, I'm only making the point. I have a lot of Chicago friends.
Yeah,
And I was in the military. I was stationed in Illinois. So on the weekend, I would take the train, go to
mm,
Chicago, kick it and stuff like that. But my point only is, like you just saying, you get a perspective of the law enforcement in Chicago. Of
right,
course, you get the drug guys. You got everyday people. You got the grandmother, the little
right,
kids, and their parents going through regular kid parent stuff. Like you getting all of those layers. It's not just the drug dealer guys. It's not
right.
just the top. So you're getting that multi-layer feel. Is my point.
Yeah, no, and you're right. And the idea, especially in those first 2 seasons, it feels more like I was saying, like a social novel where you're understanding why this and this happens, and you see it organically. The interesting thing is, I don't know where you could say the origin is of that, but I mean, if you go back a few decades, little by little, crime shows at one point were always it was like the old style, kind of like classic noir. You would have the cop or the detective, and you'd have overdubs in first person. And when you think of like Humphrey Bogart with a fedora in 1950, not a whole lot changed in decades after that, until something kind of shook that up a little bit. And then you got different voices, coming in when it comes down to it. I mean, there's an author who I like a lot, is I think he pronounced it Adenle, Leyeadenle, and he writes. His focus is particularly on human trafficking that's going on with women in Lagos in Nigeria, and you got a city of 15 million people. But the thing is, I mean, and you get a feel for the city when you're reading that, but and also in reading it, it makes me realize, wow, this feels like a big New Orleans. New Orleans is a baby city compared to this 370 something thousand, but there are things that I connect to that I see positive and negative with that when it comes down to it, and that's what I try to come about, in what I do. But
So,
you almost have to be living in that city, or you know it so well, because all those little nuances. So actually, can I say this? Unless I'm about to intuit your question, was there things in this that someone who lives here or spends a lot of time here will pick up on that are less obvious, just sort of inferred, even in the prologue, that maybe somebody else isn't going to get? That's the layers of this whole thing.
so you're going into the layers right now. I
Yeah,
love to ask the research question as a writer myself. I'm always
yeah,
intrigued by that part of any book. What was the research process like in this? You have so many New Orleans details, even some back history on Vietnamese culture and things like that, and their coming to New Orleans, right? And their
right,
interactions with black and brown people in New Orleans, right?
right.
Even the martial art aspect of it. Like, what was your research process tying this all together to write this one story? Tell us about that.
So what I'm looking for, Sean, is what you can't find in Google. Ideally, I want things that you can only find by talking to people, by walking around, by the feel of something, by something maybe historically, something socially, something culturally, that people only know on that block. Do you know what I mean? So I want something. I want that kind of depth. When it comes down to it. One of the big what ifs for this book, as in, what if you piece this together, this together, this together, was call this true crime. So the journalism I do is almost entirely music based, because I write for Offbeat and then just had a piece in 64 Parishes. I don't do true crime because I would rather change names, modify a few things, do a little composite, and put that into the novel, because that's better for my safety. So, because New Orleans has, you may have heard, New Orleans has a little dirt. So, what I do for the Bobby Dellery series, this is prior series. He is a Tulane criminologist, professor who has head knowledge, and he's put in positions on the street. So with that being the case, I read occasionally criminology books, other this and that, because he's got to be up on things, for that. And one of the books that I was reading was talking about the gang crackdown that the feds did in New York in 1991. And pretty much what was in the news was just the big Italian gangs, the names, because that's what gets played up, romanticized in movies and TV and stuff like that, right? So anybody else, it's like, oh, they're low down. But if it's the Italians, it's got that Tony Montana thing, right? And what they didn't talk about, mostly in the news, but was the case, was they were also going in Chinatown, and there were two different gangs. They were competing gangs in Chinatown that were called the Ghost Shadows and the Flying Dragons. I combined those for the book. You might recognize Ghost Dragons. So Ghost Dragons was the book, because it was just easier to make it one gang. And one of those gangs in New York was using Vietnamese teenagers to do their dirty work. Basically anything they didn't want to do, or if something went down, they could brush it off and blame these guys for it, and shake down a shopkeeper, put a hit on somebody, anything like that. And so I'm reading along, and I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't know about this, but this is kind of interesting. And then I got to one sentence, and I'd never seen this before. I've never heard anybody talk about this. And again, this is back from 1991, was when this crackdown happened. And to paraphrase, the sentence said, it is thought that some of the Vietnamese teenagers fled to the eastern part of New Orleans in an area called Versailles. And I was just like, wait, what? Wait, what? And so the way my brain works and my nose starts like, okay, there's something here, is like, wait a minute. If even one guy came here, got himself settled, and continued on as he's, getting into his 20s, getting older, and essentially really quietly running things, what might that be like? So for one of the particular characters, that was sort of the loose, so I take things in reality in some cases. And it's like, if you see a news story, you're going to get this went down, but you're not going to get anything underneath. Even journalism, you don't get the follow up very much, right? So my mindset was, what if that happened? This guy came to New Orleans, and a character came from that when it came down to it.
That's a wonderful backstory, bro. Like,
Yeah, it's a fun one.
how you pulled that from way over. I would have never guessed you pulled that from way over there. Like that's brilliant, man.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank
That's
you. And well, and
brilliant
it's, I
artistry.
mean, the thing is also, I with names, character names are important to me. Any titles, all that stuff is very important to me. And I went specifically with the name that I did, Vin Nguyen, Nguyen, because as was told to me by someone who's Vietnamese, Nguyen is the Smith of Vietnamese people. So that way you can't, there were a few names. There were a few names that I did not want to use specifically because of potential issues with who they were and me needing to keep my safety. But Win was a safe one, for some of that. I'll tell you this, actually, nobody knows this, and I haven't mentioned this on any event. You're gonna know this. Where did Julius Mosley get his name? That's a nod to the King Walter Mosley, of course. Um, where did Maya Gaines get her name? Number one, because Gaines is a New Orleans name. I went back to old city directories to just make sure that the family name Gaines would work in New Orleans. But also, there's a Louisiana writer by the name of Gaines. So, as you know, so I went with Gaines as well. So yeah,
Now look what's crazy. This is the martial art aspect to this book, large
yeah,
martial art aspect. You
yeah.
know who I thought it was? Was it the one of the elder statesmen in the large martial art community? Was a black guy named something like Moses Power or something like that? Like
Boy,
Sensei.
you know what? That name sounds
Sensei.
familiar, but I have to admit, I'm not familiar with him. Yeah,
Off the air, I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna
I,
send
w-
it to
I
you
was thinking
later.
Ernest Gaines straight up, to be honest. Yeah,
Off
yeah.
the air, I'm gonna send it to you. Is an
Okay,
African American guy.
okay,
I think he started in like the '60s or the '70s, largely in that New York kind of area or whatever. He took like this Japanese martial art. I don't want to say the wrong thing and offend anybody, but
yeah,
he took it like remixed it and remade it and made something uniquely of his own. And like the Nation of Islam, it's called the Fruit of Islam. They're male
right,
martial art aspect to the nation. A
right.
lot of them use those practices. He is like the grand master of their whole system. But his name is like Moses Power or something like that.
That
So I saw
sounds.
the Julian
th-
Moses in the book, Mosley. I was
Yeah,
like, wait a
yeah,
minute.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I thought it came from that.
Well, I'll tell you. Speaking of New York, so Mosley takes a few different styles and kind of combines elements of those together.
Yes,
Another
yes,
thing that came from New York is one of the things he teaches is what's called Tiger Claw. So a lot
yep,
of the martial arts, it's animal styles. And so for him to know that, he would have had to been in New York because there's only two people right now in the U.S. who teach what's called Fujao Pai, Tiger Claw style. And one of those is Sifu Takwa Ang, who basically the guy he learned from the original 10 Tigers of Canton, where they had
wow,
10 different animal styles. And
yes.
then some of that came to the US. There's one guy in California and there's Sifu Takwa, and that's it. And I had the honor of basically learning kind of the elements of some of that from him. But then in my mind, the way Sean my mind works was, wait a minute, what if you have some Fujao Pai and then Kali or Eskrima where you're doing the footwork like the open diamond, so your opponent's in the middle, but you're coming at the side. What if you combine the two of those? What if you do? But ultimately, where did that come from? Is because Bruce Lee himself, like Chinese people, were not in the martial arts community, were not happy with Bruce Lee because he took it from the east to the west. One,
Yep,
and number
yep,
two, he
yep.
realized the technique that he was learning was great for points, but not in a competition, but not good on the street and not good to win a fight. So what
Right.
did he said, okay, I'm gonna look at a boxer and look how a boxer comes in and it comes back and approaches and does those things. And he basically combines styles. So that's one of those things that somebody might pick up on that knows about what Bruce Lee,
So
but it's not overt, at the same time.
let's kind of tease that a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So talk about your own love of martial arts, your own practicing different various martial arts things of that nature, and the part that plays in the book because I'm always curious about this, right? Reading different action books and doing this show for a while. When a person is writing a fighting scene, a fighting sequence, right? What's it like to write a fight scene? Like, do you have to actually act it out?
Oh yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah.
you're describing like them doing the bow. You're
Right.
describing certain things that happen physically. to put that on the page and a person can read it that's not a martial artist and get it, what's that like?
Okay. So I'm going to go back a bit. As a kid, I basically I like to read and write books, and I like to fight. That was my thing. So I really wanted to do martial arts because that kind of fit, but that cost money. I wasn't able to do it. When I started writing, back about, let's say, 2011, 2012, I realized, and this was like the light bulb. If nobody takes anything else from this interview, which you're going to take a lot of gems, here's one thing that I learned was, if you find the things that as a kid that you love to do purely before you were supposed to do this, this, and this, then and you may have to talk to somebody, look through photos, discover some of those, because it might not be in your memory anymore. You might have been too young to even recall that. But if you can find, let's say, one or two things that fit under body, mind, and spirit, to me, that's how you find sort of your pure, genuine self. And when I discovered just how writing fulfilled me, and I realized, oh, that's right. I was the kid I wrote books, I made the covers, I punched holes, I tied them to bind them, I wrote plays, sold tickets to my parents with my sibling, stuff like that. I'm just doing the adult version of it, basically, because it wasn't cultivated all that time in between. So I realized, what, martial arts, I was doing, I was working out and stuff, but martial arts was one of those things. I was like, wait a minute, that was one of those things also that I really wanted to do and I couldn't do. So at a certain point, probably shy of a decade ago, I started to get into that. And one of the big things for me was I did Sean, high school track and cross country. I messed up my back and my knees so badly by age 17. I had to go to a chiropractor, get help out of a car. I was in bad shape. I was hoping that trying to do martial arts later on, all that would be okay. What I found was delivering kicks and taking them, any kind of sparring that involved the trunk, which is so key, all your force and your strength. Oh, that put me for 6 months working toward a belt. That messed me up because it aggravated my 17-year-old injuries all over again. So the approach that I did was, okay, I'm not giving up on this. I'm just going to do the things that I can do, that will work and will help to strengthen and not aggravate. So that's when I got into, with nunchucks, with Tai Chi, anything. I mean, one of the big things that I do now, and this is straight out of a lot of Kung Fu, but definitely with Tiger Claw, is deep horse stance, and then with kettlebells and different things like that. So it's something that I do almost every day to some degree. And in fact, one of the other people that Julius Mosley is based upon was Sifu Sam Kilpack, who's here in town, because of his mindset, which is, you go in some places, and this from anything that you do, fitness, military, otherwise, you go in some places martial arts wise, and it's almost like a Cobra Kai thing where they want you to get hurt. They want it to be this like drippy machismo kind of thing. And Sifu Sam is different. He intentionally tries to make it, women are welcome. Like, people, it's not that kind of vibe. And I wanted Mosley to be like that. And that's why Maya, his student, can kind of grow with it. But for the scenes, there are 3 big scenes throughout the book, as you know. And I definitely walked through those myself. And in fact, had to change some things once I physically walked through those. Here's the fun thing is, when you write, as you know, there's a lot that you intend to have in the story that you're writing. But then there's some things after the fact that either you or somebody else says, wait a minute, what about this? And you didn't know at first. And maybe it was there in your subconscious. Maybe it was just because you're aligning all these things. It brings in other elements, almost, the universal mind or God or whatever it is, the people, where it all comes from. And Sifu Sam actually pointed out to me, to give him credit, when we were walking through the scenes to do this for an event, he said, do you realize all the scenes in different ways have a circular motion around a stationary object? And I had only thought of one of those, the Tong Bei, where it's the circular move of the arms. That was the only one that I was consciously doing that. And then I was blown away because the general framework of this book is Taoism. So the book that the book within the book, The Last Shadow, is loosely based on the Tao Te Ching, or think of Buddhist proverbs and some of that. And the circle in that is key. So the fact that that was there unintentionally, that made my week, like no question.
That's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
If I answered your question, I know I hit a few things.
No, you're fine. Have you seen them? Have you seen or heard the martial art called? I think it's called Bagua.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. The same thing.
Everything is a circle, and they're doing all these circular movements, all these
Right.
circular strikes, right?
Absolutely.
It's interesting to me in martial arts. Everything is shapes.
Right.
A lot of things are triangles. A lot of
Right.
things are that diamond. A lot of things
Right.
are triangles.
Right.
And a lot of martial art insignia, the logo, you'll see the triangle and the circle
Right.
in the logo.
What
It's
you're
in
gonna
there.
love is in the event that we had at it's New Orleans Shaolin. He actually showed Bagua as far as generally the walk to illustrate it. So he showed exactly that. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, let's go back a little bit on
Yeah.
the New Orleans aspect and the details of the city, right? Talk about street names, places, little speakeasy, hole in the wall. Even you do a good job breaking down the mindset of certain people in certain places and times of day.
Mm.
So you have national audience. I see your page all the time. All these different folks from around the country buying the book and everything. So whenever you're sitting there writing those details, my question always is, do you want that person to get that same impact that land whenever I read it as a Louisiana native, or are you not even thinking about that whenever you're writing it? Like whoever get it, get it. Whoever don't, they won't. How do
Right.
you approach that? I'm always curious about
So I view before I did any of the Delary series, that book, the way to me, and I got to do this to basically do the long view and then bring it in closer. So I'm going to go from telescope to microscope. So what I saw in being in the book business in the French Quarter, um, I would see how many people from out of town went for New Orleans stories, like so badly, because people just want a piece of it. Like if they could take a brass band home, they would. They want to grab, a flagstone from Jackson Square. They want a piece of New Orleans so badly. But I know also you can't get New Orleans wrong, and so many, especially TV shows and movies, do. Um, and I saw from the very beginning the audience for what I do being definitely born and raised locals, people who have come here at whatever point or visit here, and then people who have never been here who, like me, like, oh, I want to read about this particular place and get, kind of a feel for everything. So I didn't, I moved to New Orleans 21 years ago. I didn't try to write actually at all, definitely about New Orleans, until I'd been here a decade. And when I did those Delary books, they have settings around the city, but the focus is the part of the Ninth Ward where I lived and then expanded away from the river little by little, because I knew that I could walk around. I didn't want to get it wrong. For Last Shadow, that's the first book that I've covered essentially more of the city, like when it comes down to it for that. So I guess what I want to create is one for the audience of born and raised locals. I don't want to have something that feels wrong, much less, something, let's see, like Carrollton is not going to tee into Charter Street, something like an edit that you might get on a TV show or a movie. So like the basic things have to be right. So in the prologue where Maya's biking up Esplanade, the cross streets, those are actual cross streets, of course, but also I chose those because the words to be particularly evocative, to just kind of set the tone, for things. So for that audience, you got to get that right. For the other audiences, there might be some things that they don't necessarily know. In the same way, if I read one of the Adenle books about Lagos, there's some things that I don't know, but it gives me a general, even if it's like it washes over you, like in an impressionistic way, it gives you a feel for that, as best as you can. Like if I read Chester Himes talking about Harlem in the 60s, Jim Thompson talking about Oklahoma in the 1950s, I'm not able to take in as much as somebody who was actually there at the time. But if you do it well, you can literally make the city, the
it.
setting, its own character. That's the hope. So
So there are two things, right?
yeah.
So this is probably almost 15 whatever years ago, before I even became a writer myself. Just reading Eric Jerome Dickey's fictional books, he always has so much fine detail in the book. Like you can almost see the cafes he's talking about. You can see it. Even whenever it was something international, like I think to myself, he had to go and fly over there and spend time there to write
Right.
about it like this, right?
Yeah.
Other thing is Ernest Gaines. I went to Ernest Gaines book signing years ago.
Mm.
Even though they're like a Louisiana-based stories, he's writing those in California. I couldn't believe that.
Yeah.
He was in California writing those stories. I'm like, man, that's crazy.
Well, think about his memories. So that's where he's. So you do have that step removed, right? Because that's from his memories. One thing I think Sean, that's key is for New Orleans is sensory information. Like New Orleans, if it's 20 degrees out and it's so cold you can't smell anything, it doesn't feel right. And I mean that in great ways. And you can't smell crawfish. You can't smell, whatever you don't want to smell. But that sensory thing is big. Like during the lockdown, you didn't hear music. You really, sometimes you can walk down a block and somebody's practicing. You didn't really hear much of that either. At least I didn't. Like, and I do try to plug in as much of those as possible because I feel that's New Orleans is a very sensory place. And
Bruh,
then that's a way, and that's also a way to connect somebody if they've been here. Oh, they can take that in.
the minute you said about being on lockdown and not hearing anything, I really felt that.
Yeah.
Because all of my times going to New Orleans, you're right. It is kind of a bustling, always in motion, always moving place. So try to imagine in my mind, like stillness, like nothing, like that sounds crazy, bro.
It was different city. Yeah, an absolutely different city. I think another thing, just thinking about writing New Orleans per se, is anybody who pays attention to the news and the headlines, like you can't beat that, you can't top that. And I think this is something I think that's key. I was thinking about this. So one thing we were talking about, I think the other day, was about although there are plenty of people in New Orleans, there are very few New Orleanians who write fiction set in New Orleans. And that one of the things I think about is why is that? My reflexive to it was, oh well, they don't want to get it wrong. But you know what I think some of it is because there is a lot of nonfiction, and every year there's all this that comes out, and even a book on the drainage of New Orleans, which is one of Rich Campanella's book. Even that book, I haven't read it, but I want to because I know the people and the stories are as vibrant and colorful and a little crazy as a novel would be. So as a fiction writer, you can't take on the headlines. You almost can't take on real life because people would think it wasn't even plausible, when it comes down to it. So you have to sort of find your way. Some people do historic fiction, crime fiction or otherwise. So then that way you really immerse yourself in that period, and then you can kind of write with that. My approach is, and this is from the journalism thing, is the way that my kind of nose leads me for all this is I'm just going to go deep to offer a better understanding of why this happened, of something that even somebody in the city may not know about this, and this, because you can't compete with the headlines.
No. I
Yeah,
love that quote where they say the truth is stranger than fiction. Because you're
it's
right.
true.
Some things that's happening in real life in the headlines
Right,
sounds totally probably nonsensical, even in a fictional book. Like, man, come on.
right,
That's not, that don't make any sense. But it's
right,
real life, right?
right. They would
So,
think you were cheating if you had it in print, and you're like, no, that actually happens in New Orleans. Yeah,
right. I want to ask you about your chapter titles, right? Because
yeah,
I'm always curious to authors. I'm big on chapter titles, subtitles. I'm big on even book titles, right? So
hmm,
tell us the chapter titles you have in the book. They sound like you mentioned Taoism and things like that. Your
yeah,
chapter titles sound very like virtues, right? Like patience leads to great virtue, for an example, chapter two. So give us the idea of your chapter title concept. As I was going through the book, I was looking at that like, wait a minute. Started flipping around like, wait a minute. The way is in the form, chapter
right,
one.
right,
Tell
right.
us about the chapter title.
Yeah. So as you know, for those chapter headers, some of them seem like, okay, they're describing what's about to happen. There's some other ones that you're like, well, what's the connection to that? Some of them ask questions or seem to be inconsistent within like the sentence itself when it comes down to it. And essentially what I wanted to do with this is have The Last Shadow be a book within a book. So Julius Mosley, when he was in New York as a younger man, was kind of basically a drunk falling down mess. A situation when the particular situation that happened that brought him eventually to New Orleans, he just walking down the street discovered a book, and call it a book of wisdom, and that's what's changed his life. And throughout the book, he's reading from that. I don't want to give anything too much from that, but I will say that the book itself would be essentially modeled on like the Tao Te Ching, Buddhist proverbs, words of wisdom, and then also Miyamoto Musashi, who was a Japanese swordsman, has different books and had
the Book of Five Rings, right?
Yeah,
Is the
yeah,
Book
exactly.
of Five Rings?
Yeah, same guy. He had some, I guess, called like precepts or axioms to live by, maybe 30 or so of those before he died. And I love the idea of, in some cases, it's sort of like a palate cleanser to prepare you for the chapter to come. In other ways, it stretches the reader's mind of like, well, wait a minute, why did the chapters say that if this is what's here? Or, that's here. How does that connect with this, and this? So that's another one, like a layer. You can say, okay, this is one, boom, this is two, boom, or you can take that a little bit more. Now, the title, The Last Shadow, was one. The way that I work is I either have, for the title of the book itself, I either know exactly what I want it to be, or I wait until some of the story develops and just use a working title as a placeholder. But I don't just write generally without, I want something almost like the peak of the mountain to be that guide, the umbrella for that guide. And Last Shadow for me, I don't remember exactly where that came from, but I remember the minute I thought it, I was like, oh, that's good. But how many times has that been used before? So I immediately go to Google, I go to Amazon, I go wherever to see, and then when I found, oh, this hasn't been used really, I was like blown away, like, wait, this is too good. So for me, that first is evocative. It can't help but be, is The Last Dragon. So the classic movie, right? I'm happy to say, official as of today, I'm going to the Urban Action Showcase, and it's the 40th anniversary of Last Dragon. Timex going to be there, like Shonup's crew, two maybe people are going to be there. That's going to be crazy. But it also speaks to Last Shadow is then when maybe it's his last hurrah, because there's this young guy who's kind of been mocking him, talking bad about him in public, that wants to take over his business and then expand him, what he's doing. So maybe it's the last one for him. Maybe it's a shadow for the sake of Maya. She's been dealing with a lot of things, Maya Gaines, and maybe it's the last time she's going to be in the shadows when it comes down to it. But then the other key thing, and this kind of thing, the point about childhood, is Mosley lives by a code. One of the big questions, the either ors for Mosley is, okay, young man, he was a mess. Now he lives by a code in basically a party city. He has his way that he follows, but can he follow that way when he's put in a very difficult position with his student? And for me, sort of the key meaning of that whole title is, if you consider that as a child, you had the things that you just loved to do or that you were attracted to. For me, I totally forgot. My mom reminded me, I liked stones. I would collect stones. I wanted to get like a little gemstone polish or, stuff like that. And that was part of that whole body, mind, and spirit. Find those things that you're into, and that's different. That's unique for everybody. And then the idea is, if you genuinely, within Taoism, they call just working toward the way without working. You're just finding sort of your personal way. And if as an adult, the shadow that you cast is the same as a child, not physically, of course, but that you're casting because you've returned to that kid that inside, that you're gravitating to those same things, and you find the adult version of them. If that last shadow that you cast is the same as a child, then that means that you personally, you found your own way. Your journey got you back to the beginning, and that's a circle, right? That's that circle when it comes down to it. Yeah. So all that's in there, but it's also, it could just be a fun story, too.
Yeah. Also on chapter titles and subtitles and things like that. Back to TV shows, right?
Yeah.
When I watch these TV shows in a series, right, you see the titles of the episodes.
Right.
A lot of times, the title of the episode is something that a person might say in the most random line in the show, like a pass by moment.
Right.
But that moment becomes the title of the episode, right? And I
Yep.
also heard that the rapper Tupac Shakur, of course, they said whenever Tupac was writing, he was working so fast, he didn't want to waste time on let's think about this, think about that. Like, okay, wait a minute, what's the last thing you said? That's the title of the song. Cue the next song. Like,
Mm. Mm.
so a lot of his song titles was only something that was said within the song at some point.
Right.
The song wasn't made around the title, the other way around. He made the
Right.
song, then become the title, and it worked out that way.
Well, and also I was viewing this initially as a screenplay and a very visual kind of thing. So that title also served, like you're saying, in the '70s for movies. That also served to sort of not paint a picture, but because it's more abstract, but to sort of awaken the mind for what's to come. Like exactly like you said, like you might see on screen.
Let's get into the main character, the protagonist, right?
Yeah.
Miss Maya Gaines, right? Tell me the concept you had in your mind when you created this character. Then you got her childhood backstories in there.
Right.
She's like a flawed hero, right? She's not like a perfect person. She
Right.
has her own things she's dealing with, her things she's trying to overcome throughout the book, stuff like that. Give us the concept of this character when you thought about it.
Sure. So so Maya fit in basically the idea that I had, which was three main settings, three main characters. And there has to be between Mosley and Vin Win, there had to be a good connector. And to me that worked and then go deep within that. Um, I thought initially it was Walter. I was about to say Walter Mosley. I thought initially it was Julius Mosley's story, but then I got to a certain point and I realized no, this is Maya Gaines' story, and that's why this can be a trilogy because it's her basically becoming a warrior, not just physically but also mentally, because the things that she's got to deal with. And for me, because obviously I'm not a because my background is not Maya Gaines' background. So for me, that also meant more work, to try to kind of nail some different qualities with her. I will say some of the particulars going back to the quote true crime, or basically like something that went down in New Orleans. The situation why her parents are not around, as in they're somewhere out of state, actually was a piece that I saw. There had been pharmacy. You got the pharmacist, you got the accountant. They're a couple. They've been doing a pill mill for a while, and it only got found out because he was also running a club, and the club got busted because they were doing a bunch of illegal stuff. And when they got busted, then everything else came tumbling down. So in my mind, it's like, wow, what must it be like for their kids when that happened? You have a
So wait,
secure life, you got mommy and daddy, you have everything. What would that be like if that was your daughter? So when I thought of it in those terms, that made me kind of understand Maya a little bit better. Because think of it, she's this happy-go-lucky kid who all of a sudden has the rug pulled out, and now she's staying with her auntie. But where you think you have all this in front of you, now you're miserable with life, and like, is this all it is? And is this all it's going to be? So for her, when the book begins, she's been doing martial arts for about 6 months. So for her to find that she's not just good, that she's exceptional, this is more than just physical fitness for her. This is something where, like, hey, this is something I can control because everything else around me has been out of my control. I'm working a couple restaurant jobs in the quarter, not enjoying it. Like, life seems kind of terrible. She even, you get a scene when she's in the restaurant, she's walking or she's riding her bike home, she gets a flat tire. So it's just like, can things get like any worse when it comes down to it? And she has, I don't want to mention what it is, but even with all that, I also gave her kind of an Achilles heel that she had dealt with personally, but that's sort of on the wane because of everything with martial arts. So it's basically what it's supposed to be in the best possible way is it's helping her kind of deal with other things because of the mental and also the philosophical with all this. But in the very first chapter, you see that, okay, she's not only the only woman in the class, she's the only Black woman, and other than teacher, like she's it. She's got to be the person in the room, basically, when it comes down to it. You realize that even toward the end of it, where she and Mosley are not being aggressive, but kind of showing you don't want to play with us, with these guys that kind of intrude on their practice, that even then, when he's proud of her and essentially commending her, she doesn't smile, like, because she hasn't smiled for a while. She and he, it's a teacher-student relationship that throughout the book begins to become mentor and mentee kind of thing. But that's sort of a slow process in this. One of the key things for me was, and other than just living and being around and talking with people with some of this, is also okay. And this will definitely be the sake for book 2. But if you're going to be a warrior and you get labeled as being a warrior, then you have to be tested. You don't get that without being put to the test. So that means she's got to go through some stuff to get to this point. You got to have the friction, or otherwise there's no, the payoff doesn't mean anything without that. That's the balance of all of it. So in the second book, which I'm hoping to be able to get that written this summer for first draft anyway, and then edit after all that stuff. But in that one, she's really going to get put to the test, because she's got to be next level. But the key thing, and this is coming from Mosley with her, is that it's not just about the physical movement, but it's about this, and it's about the soul. And that's a lot of it when it comes down to it, is the big decision she's got to make. Does she do or stay with something that is essentially allowing her to be self-actualized into who she thought, she wasn't going to be able to be anymore, and the purity of that? Or her auntie could use the money, and this is not necessarily the best route, but do I need to do this by bare necessity? And that's reality. I mean, that part was easy for me, because that's New Orleans for a lot of people when it comes down to it, is, you know what? I didn't think I'd be in this position. I didn't want to have to do this, but I got to do what I got to do, when it comes down to it. But ultimately, she's got to make that decision.
So me having also the background in psychology, being the counselor for a long time, and going to school for psychology, she has certain things that she displays where you can tell, like you said, she has some childhood things happen to her, right?
Right.
She's doing some of these things. It's kind of it's a side effect of what she's going through, and her
Right.
trying to cope, subconsciously the best way she can. So she's
Right.
displaying certain things. I love that about her in the book. She
Cool.
wasn't some perfect hero, perfect person. She had these things she had to deal with. That made it more tangible, more believable, even.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. That's well. And the thing is, you write what you write, and ultimately, you don't know how it's going to be received. You know what you intended, what you hope for, but you don't necessarily know what people are going to pick up on. And it's funny, because as things progress with this, I found myself, both protective and also wanting to challenge her for the subsequent books to come, at the same time. And that's kind of a fun way to be, where you feel so closely connected with your characters, when it comes down to it. One of the things that hit me, this is random, Sean, but one of the things that hit me was, if somebody would have asked me, hey, did you put some of yourself in any of those characters when it came down to it? I would have said a little bit in Mosley, but not really. No, these are actually pure, and then I realized after the fact that if you take the id, the ego, the super ego, there are elements of me in each of those characters in that way. And that was like one of those things that was kind of crazy, when it came down to it. But yeah, I like
So, so
I like my gains. When you feel for her, you can't help but feel for the
yeah,
stuff she's going through. You want her to win, when it comes down
yeah,
to it.
yeah. You mentioned to me off the air before the show. We'll bring it up right now.
Yeah,
You mentioned writing the second book, for an example. You just said that, writing the next book to this. You mentioned on behind the scenes, you write with the pen and paper first.
I do.
Now, a few writers in the room right now, and we always telling our potential clients, like, bruh, you got to go on a laptop or computer because you got to double write. If you're writing the pen and paper, you got to transcribe all this stuff to be edited, formatted, layout, everything else, right?
Right.
So tell the audience, why do you choose to still write the old school pen and paper? Go.
Okay. So first off, for anything I do for journalism, offbeat pieces, it's laptop. I can shape it that way. It's 1,500 to 3,000 words. I can do everything that way, and I already have the interview transcribed in Word, so I can shape it that way. For anything else, sort of my way to do it is I'm basically sprawled out. I've got a legal pad. I've got my outline. I've got some notes around me, and just some other things to kind of put me in that vibe, that sort of headspace, for everything. And what I've found was I didn't do the MFA route. I did the route you live life and you just read and you work on your stories and just keep editing those and make those better. And one of the key things that I operate from is there's a writing book called Bird by Bird by Annie Lamott, and what she calls the shitty first draft. I operate by that, where the first draft, you know what you want to say, but you're just getting it out. You don't worry about grammar. You don't worry about spelling, any of that. You're just getting that out when it comes down to it. For me, the pace of that, the pen on paper, as compared to, for anything of length, the pace of that, I prefer that to typing. And it just feels, the unexplainable thing, Sean, is it just feels true to me to do it that way. Does that take longer than to get that in the computer? Yes. But what I found now that Microsoft Word has dictation is you can then basically, when that's done, you could basically read that to yourself aloud back to Word. Word's going to do dictation. You're definitely going to have to clean it up. But you can, number one, use that for an editing draft. It's a draft that was heard aloud. And actually my last draft of the book itself was reading it aloud as well. But I guess what I like about it is it's just the pace of it feels right to me, when it comes down to it. And but see, I'm also the person that, like, for my planner, I don't do that on a phone or a computer. I have an old school spiral bound. I can look at the week at a glance. I need that spatial, that tactile kind of quality, when it comes down to it. Now that means when I get done, I've got, the positive is I've got a legal pad or a notebook that's full, and I can say, wow, I got a book. How cool that is. The negative is that's a lot of writing, when it comes down to it. But I think some of it is I just physically need to see that, and looking at pen on paper compared to typed, and there are studies that if you're physically, even like if you're physically reading a book compared to Kindle, or if you read something that's on a page compared to on the screen, that the backlighting doesn't allow us to retain knowledge and think as deeply as something that's physically on a page itself. I don't know if that bears in. I feel like maybe that does, but that for me, that might be part of it.
Once again, because this show is an educational show, and a lot of people that's trying to write are watching the show and getting ideas and things. So I love to always say, like, there is no one way. It's like martial arts, right?
Thank you. I'm
There
glad you
is
said that.
no way. There is no one. It's only how you perform. If you feel better with the old school tactile, by all means, who am I to say don't do that if you find you
Right.
write the best that way?
Right.
So I love to show different ways of writing and publishing and marketing. Like,
Right.
you all have various ideas of how to go about this thing, and you have one that's unique to yourself, and I love hearing that.
Look, I'm so glad you said that, because that's one of those questions people always ask is like that sort of thing. How do you do that? Everybody you talk to is going to say something different, but they're going to sometimes present it like that's God's word, like that's the be all end all of this. And yeah, ultimately you got to find the best time of day that works. You've got to find the sort of way that you do it that works. And initially I didn't tell anybody that I would just essentially like recline out on the bed, because I just felt that that just seems. And then guess what? Little by little, I started coming upon randomly different writers over X amount of time that's what they did. You just don't hear about it. It's the image is always the person at the desk that's typing or doing whatever. Let me tell you this: I cannot sit at a desk and write anything that you want to read. Like, that's just not my way. I need my body to be configured differently. But for some people, that might be the way that they're able to to communicate it best. But I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yeah, because it's for everybody.
Yeah.
You just find your way.
I joined the masterclass subscription program, right? So you have all the who's who, James Patterson, Walter Mosley, in case all these big
Mm.
time people, and they're telling you the nuances of, like, what's a day in the life for them. What does that look like hour by hour? How does that go? You find various vastly different responses to that kind of a question. Like
Right.
there is no one lock in way, and all of them are successful writers. So I just
Right.
love the audience to always hear these various other ways that it could be done,
Right.
right?
Right. Well, and it's because too, these are things that anybody that's I would say whether you excel or just consistently doing it, you can only know that and by discovering it, right? Like that means for somebody to know this is what works for me, that's because they've had the consistency with it. And I would say actually for anybody out there that's kind of looking to write in some fashion, the big thing, like with anything in life, is to be honest, most people are inconsistent. If consistency was easy, everybody would be doing it, but it doesn't happen. So if you as somebody who's wishing to write, it's like anything else. If you say, okay, I'm going to go to the gym once a month, then guess what? Every time you go to the gym, the next day you're going to be sore, you're going to be winded, you're going to be whatever else. Imagine if you wrote only one Saturday a month. Like I don't subscribe to that. If you want to exercise or you want to use the muscle, you have to exercise the muscle. That means learning a foreign language. That means working out. That means writing. That means anything. Does that mean every day? Not necessarily, but you have to have a certain level of commitment. And through that, that's how you develop voice. Like you can't develop voice and style if you're only occasionally doing anything, when it comes down to it. So I think that's the other key thing is for anybody out there, and that's a great thing. In the same way people have different ways that they're going to actually do this, everybody also has their own voice because everybody has something different within them, and also the influences. And I don't mean just writers, the influences of life and living are different for everybody. And the only way you can know what yours is to just be doing it, when it comes down to it. That's one reason I love doing journalistic pieces, because when you have a word count and a deadline, boom, you got to knock it out. And you can't rely on, oh well, I'm only going to do this when I'm inspired, because no, that's not. And that's for creative writing, that's also not how it works. There is no such thing as writer's block, because you create your own inspiration. If you're continually doing it, then you're continually thinking of ideas. At least that's the way I found it, because I feel like by doing it, you're putting that in your subconscious. So even when you're not thinking, oh, about this and this, that's why you keep a notebook. Ideas will pop up, and you're like, oh, where'd that come from? It's because you were actively doing it, and it was down in there. It just, maybe it needed the smell of this or that street, or seeing whatever person to bring that up there, or it was just waiting to come up the whole time. But to me, do you find that the same thing? Like, do you find there is no writer's block, that you create your own inspiration? You can't wait
Yeah.
for it.
Well, I guess for a person like myself, that's a very incredibly difficult question, and it's almost like not fair to anybody else because since I was 3 or 4 years old, I was always a highly driven person. I'm a highly motivated. So anywhere I go, the hardest question is, Sean, what's your motivation? Or how do you find it? Because I don't remember not having it.
Because it's inside. Yeah.
I don't remember ever feeling like, man, I want to do this thing, but I don't know. I don't feel like it today, and I don't really want to do it, and I'm procrastinating. I don't feel those particular emotions.
Yeah.
So most of my goals is like I'm like a pit bull holding on to something. Like I just can't let it go until it's manifested, until it's completed.
Right.
And sometimes it's kind of it's a gift and a curse, right? Like I could be obnoxious about it. They call it being obsessing on something. Like
Right.
until it's done, I'm thinking it. I'm thinking it in the shower, almost in my sleep. I'm thinking it in my subconscious mind. It's going. So for me, I'm very very driven and motivated to when I'm writing something. People always say, man, how long did it take to write? How long did it take to write this book? How long did it take to write that book? I'm knocking it out because once the outline is there, I know every writing session. Today is this chapter. Today is this chapter. This is going down. Of course, I'm human. I mean, things happen in life like a tragedy, to where it takes all the creative energy out of you. Because
Right. Right.
you have a death in the family, or you lose a job, or you have a relationship thing, or a life thing.
Right.
That's an abnormal moment, though. That's not all the time. Shouldn't be all the time,
Right.
right?
And something you mentioned that was key is having some kind of obsessive nature is great for a writer, because it just lends itself. It's an outlet for it that's perfect. I think when it come down to it.
You
Um,
know, I saw the comedian Dave Chappelle said that even whenever he's not like working a bit, like everything in his life is a bit always going
Wait,
because
say that again. Everything in his life is what again?
Dave Chappelle, the comedian, he
Yeah,
said one time in the podcast, like even whenever he's not working on a skit or a comedy stand up thing, he's
yeah.
just at the house just chilling. But everything to him is funny.
Mm,
Everything to him becomes a skit. Everything in his mind, even if it doesn't actually write it, but
right,
it's happening all the time. If you're a rapper, you hear the most random word in passing. You probably put together
right,
lines
right,
in your
right,
mind, right?
right,
So for us writers, as creatives, everything is content.
right, right,
People always say, "How you do so many shows all the time? How you have so many lives?" I'm like, I'm just driving down the highway. I might see something on a billboard. You know what? I'm gonna do a live about that tonight. I'm gonna do a live on it.
right,
And
right,
it's just because you always working it. Back to your point, you always
right,
in repetition doing it, right?
right. Well, what I find too is, and some of this is back from the bookstore managing days, is when your mind is focused on something. I guess when your antenna are up, you see things that whether it's like a sign, whether you come upon something, and really with the modern world and social media, we're bombarded with information. We're bombarded with so many things. So our minds can't retain all of that. It's just there's too much. But there's some things, where it feels like, and I don't mean because the phone's listening to you and you're getting ads that are something that you're interested in. I mean more on the level of it can sometimes feel like where you're you have whatever your particular focus is. Maybe I was saying, okay, I'm going to read something about the life of Miyamoto Musashi. Well, then all of a sudden I keep coming across various things. But what I feel like is it's always, all of that is out there. Like all that's out there. It's just when our minds are kind of focused and fine tuned on something, that's when we notice those things, but they're there the whole time. It's just that, that was the thing that we happen to be thinking about.
You know what it's like? You don't see a certain car on the highway. You finally say, you know what? I want to get a green
Yes.
Prius,
Yes. Yes.
and then you go buy one. You
Right.
drive it, and now it's like all these Priuses everywhere. Like, wait a minute,
Exactly.
y'all just went and bought a Prius? Like, no, they always been there. You
Yeah.
wasn't thinking about a Prius, right? So it's
Right.
just your mind's just
Right.
weed out like that. It's crazy, man.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes you feel like, okay, is somebody watching me? Because like this is just uncanny. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna go into the business of books. I
Yeah.
love discussing the business of books, especially on this podcast. I'm always trying to give the background to behind the curtain, if you will. So if you had a high school kid that said, "Man, I love what you're doing," we'll get into the book game, the book business, right? What would you advise a person starting out to know going into the game?
Now, are you meaning for somebody to write or somebody to get into publishing?
Getting into publishing.
Okay. So my perspective was, I guess, maybe unique because I had been in the book business, new and used, for let's say a decade plus, something like that. So I knew, I know what it's like when what a customer looks for, how long they look at the cover until they flip to the back, until they look for the blurb on the inside. I had it counted down to seconds what it would take. That literally you judge the book by its cover, like all that stuff. So for me, that kind of helped. But what I've found, so Bill Lavender, who did UNO Press and did their creative writing program, had published my prior books. I knew enough, but still had enough to learn that I was like, you know what, I can do this with myself. And now, as it turns out, to publish in October, Kalamu Yasalam's novel Walking Blues about Robert Johnson walking across Mississippi. And I'm hoping for 1 to 2 books a year. So some will be me, some will be other people whose work that I like, but probably either New Orleans focused or New Orleans when it comes down to it. So for me, for right now, I've taken the approach for basically getting the books out there is 2 different ways. And that's number one is Ingram is the distributor for any bookstore or any library, not just in the US, but around the world. And so that means, you've got the New Orleans Public Library, much less a bookstore in London, much less, anybody think of it. If they want to order a copy, they can get a copy from Ingram when it comes down to it. You also, as a publisher or an author, you can order copies from them because guess what? Every event that you do might not always be in a bookshop. Plus, you want to have books with you literally the whole selling out of the trunk thing, because now with Venmo, PayPal, and everything else, you can do that easily. Um, but you want to have those books available. At this point, I don't leave the house if I don't have a bag of half a dozen books, and I'm glad have done that, because I'm selling them out there. Running into people, this and that. You never know how it's gonna. So Ingram is
Right.
one part of it. If you Ingram Spark specifically, but I'll get back to that. The other one that you got to have is, I would, in a perfect world, wish that everybody bought their books from an independent bookstore, but sometimes it doesn't work that way. So you got to go with Amazon. So Amazon for both the print books and then the Kindle version for people that do the EPUB thing. That's the other way that you can have that out there. The good thing is when it's on between Amazon and Ingram, that also means automatically, if somebody goes to everything from Target.com, Walmart.com, keepongoing.com, they're going to have the books. They're not stocking them in the store. They're getting them through these distributors. So here's how this works, and here's how I'm doing it. It used to be the case that what's called print on demand equaled inferior. They were doing low quality. The books weren't good. The covers looked like they were made in like Microsoft Word 1987. I mean, they weren't good. And what's happened over time is the technology's improved. And then guess what? First, it was the university presses. And now the major publishers have realized, wait a minute, two things. One, we only have so much room in the warehouse. Two, we had a lot of books we were remaindering. That's actually 1A. And then two is that actually, wait a minute, we can be more efficient about how essentially we're printing books. And that means, unless it's a bestseller, we need to have a bunch of copies. We don't have to print all these in some cases so quickly. Or what they're doing more so for the big publishers is their backlist. Maybe you got an author that from a book from a decade ago, you're only selling so many copies. Well, you need to have them on hand, but you can't have too many. So quietly, how you tell this is, especially in the university press, is the back of the book. You flip the cover, look in the back, look on the bottom right, and it'll have the print on demand particulars on it. And it started about a decade ago for university press, and now the majors are doing that. But what does that mean for you and I? That means that if you have an artist who does a great cover that is indistinguishable from anything the majors would do, and you have a solid person also who's done books before, you don't want a random person. In my experience, you don't want to do it yourself either, is to do the layout. As long as you have the two of those, you can have an incredible looking book. And then essentially you just need those two PDFs for Ingram Spark. And then for Amazon, it's called now Kindle Direct, but it's also the print version of that. As long as you have those two PDFs, the big thing for someone who's new to this is to know and also communicate with your layout person. Are we going 5x8? Are we going 6x9? White paper, cream paper. You choose one, and one of my mistakes. I'm a gem. So whoever out there does not deal with this, is I thought everything was good. Got my proof copies. The spine was shifted off a little bit. I checked with the layout guy, like, why is it looking like that? And he's like, well, did you choose cream paper? And I said, no, I went with white. He's like, go with cream because it's a little thicker. And then it's good for the reader. And that also will shift the spine into place. Did that, got the proof, all was good. So, there's things like that you can't know unless you live with it and find out the hard way. That's why you get proofs. So you can with both Ingram and Amazon, you can request what are called proof copies. Basically, we're seeing if this looks like what we want it to look like. Do we need to change it? Do we need to do, all those kind of things? One thing that's big too, and this is the gamble that people play, is do you want the copies through Ingram? Do you want the copies to be returnable by a bookstore? Some people say, no, not at all. Once I get paid and get my money, that's it. But what that also means, I know from the book business, is if a bookseller sees that the copies are non-returnable, they're probably going to order less when it comes down to it. So you're playing off of that. The cool thing about this, and this is still new to me, so I'm enjoying and discovering this, is Ingram Spark is great on reports. So I can go in on any given time, literally right now, and say, okay, how many copies have been ordered? They don't give you specifics. They give you the country. So I can say, okay, here's how many were in the US. Here's how many were whatever. Like one of my thrills from just a few days ago was one to find out that a bookstore in Germany ordered 3 copies. I don't know where they heard about that. I don't know how that happened, but that happened. And then also to find out they have it in the airport. I don't know, they must have seen something with media, but they got it from Ingram because they didn't get the books from me. The other benefit of being able to print the books and have them shipped to you from Ingram is some bookstores, most new bookstores are going to go through Ingram because that's where they're placing 1 or 2 orders a week. Usually that's where they're getting all their books from. But there's some stores, especially for some used stores that, at least in New Orleans, that carry new books that don't have an Ingram account, that will actually buy them on consignment. Um, and the favor of doing that on consignment, I always make sure people know, if you do it through me, it's 50-50. If you do it through Ingram, it's 60-40, and you're making 10% less for that. So that's one of those things that I try to push, when it comes down to it. But that, for me, for the two of those, my approach, Sean, with this, some people have the approach, we're going to try to get as many reviews in advance and use those reviews, which essentially is the word of mouth, so-and-so's vouching for it, a notable person or newspaper, magazine, what have you, vouch for it. The approach that I took was this. The artist Kevin Camarda did an incredible job with the cover. When I see that, I'm like, I would go anywhere, watch anything, read anything for that cover. So my approach was, okay, you can tell it's New Orleans. You got the map, you got the buildings in red at the bottom. It's got some, to me, I think it's evocative and mysterious and all that stuff. My approach was, one, I got to make sure everything's in place for Ingram and Amazon to have this ready to go. So I need to have that and basically a 6-month marketing plan. So everybody can do it, whatever they think. For me, if you're going to be doing this for publishing or anything, you have to have a 6-month marketing plan, because there's some things in place. Media people, you want to be on TV, be interviewed, you want to have whatever in the paper. Guess what? So does everybody else. And you have to be persistent and stay on them. And they may not even reply to your first email. They may not reply to your second. But every time I reach out to somebody, I provided new information for them that they didn't know the first time, to add to everything else, to add to the press kit. And that's the other thing, is I would advise having a press kit with basically a one sheet of, this is a small little picture of the cover, author cover, blurbs. That's the other thing, is get blurbs from other authors out there, or people that would be, for that particular book. Why is that of value? That they would want to look at that. I will say this, one person that told me, she actually left me a wonderful voicemail. She's not going to mind that I speak on this. Is she said to me, you know what? I don't do blurbs, but I'm really, I'm looking forward to reading the book, blah, blah, blah. Was actually Linda Hamilton, as in Terminator, Linda Hamilton. Because why did I want her to do the blurb? Because the woman who's thought of as one of the major, lady action heroes, like for Love and Maya Gaines, that's exactly who I wanted, when it came down to it. So those are all the things that I'm thinking about when it, all this. We have a book out there, we have to have marketing, and then it was the steps of it. Like, if you're not with a major publisher, they have deep pockets for marketing. If you don't have that, how do you let people know about your book? Other than posting on your socials, telling your friends, some of that. You can use Instagram and sponsor stories. Same thing on business for Facebook, sponsor and get the word out there. You can also, essentially, for me, it was step one was saturate New Orleans. I don't want somebody to have not even at least seen the cover and wonder what was that. So one way was to basically get as much media as possible, which anyway, you would do that, but have as many events, but have them so they're not cannibalizing each other, and have them different in different kind of ways, but also unique and be kind of fun. And that's one of those things I feel like you either have a knack for it or you don't. If you feel like you don't, hire a publicist that has a great sense of fresh things to do, when it comes down to it. For me, second step was, okay, we saturated New Orleans. I was actually at French Quarter Fest yesterday, taking a break from signing books from basically noon till last night was 10, but it was 11 through the previous. I was sitting there watching a band over by the Old Mint, they call it the Jazz Museum, just talking to a guy sitting next to me. As we're chatting, something came up about writing a music piece about the band that was on stage. And then he was asking about something else. So I says, yeah, I have a book out as well. And I showed him the cover, and he's like, oh, I've seen that. That's your book? And I was like, yeah. He couldn't remember where he saw it, But that, to me, mission accomplished, mission accomplished. But the second part is get the book to the rest of the country. I don't have deep pockets, or most indie publishers have $0 for marketing, zero for marketing. So how do you get your book out there to a national audience? If you're in New Orleans and it's French Quarter Fest, the rest of the country's coming to you. If it's Jazz Fest, the rest of the country's coming to you. If it's Essence, the rest of the countries and the rest of the world in some cases is coming to you. So for me, those are three key times, especially in the summer for Essence, when it's just kind of low season with that one weekend. That's when you have to hit it really hard, because what you don't know is maybe, regardless of how many copies you sell, I have books now that are now going back to, just off the cuff, this is from last night, going to Philly, Baltimore, California, Detroit, Brooklyn,
Yeah, a lady from Japan on there, right?
and actually,
From
yeah,
Japan?
yeah, and young lady from Japan as well. That's just the people from last night that I can think of. And what does that mean? Those are people that, one, hopefully they love the book. Maybe they'll pass it on to somebody else. Maybe they'll love the book. Maybe they'll go on Goodreads. Maybe they'll go on Amazon. Maybe they'll tell their local bookstore, oh, you should carry this. Maybe, I don't know, and they do a podcast of some sort, and they're going to say, hey, you should have this. Maybe they have a book club, and all of a sudden the book club is going to say, hey, we would love to do this and this. You never know where any of this is going to lead to, when it comes down to it. And that's the kind of thing that, here's the catch. Here's the great equalizer when it comes down to it. The major publishers have that money. So what I did for the last few days, which was basically put in 12-hour days signing books and getting to meet people. I love it. Was exhausting because it was a long day after day, but the connection was incredible. That's the kind of thing that I love. If I meet, like when I met Walter Mosley, that was incredible to me. And that's something that I got to have with people who are reading my books that typically you don't get. But why do I also love that? Because any indie publisher does not have the deep pockets that a major does. The equalizer is doing the work, doing like major work and hustling, because, to be honest, I don't know, and I'm not going to say, because who knows, I don't know of any author that was out there doing what I was doing. But you know what? I saw different artists were out there. I saw, like the Jackson Square fortune tellers were out there. I saw, different people that were out there, street musicians, plenty of street musicians that were doing their thing. What I do, like the hustle for, what I do, I'm not writing my books to be Dear Diary. I'm not, I want people to read them, and I want to, continue with this. And, writing as it is so, it's so solitary. You're fairly isolated, at least the way that I do it. So, anything that's some form of back and forth and collaboration is fun to me, because the rest of the time, and I need it because I'm introverted, I need that, but I also need to have that connection. I don't know, tell me if this is you as well. I write for myself what I want to read, but I do hope it's received well. And I do hope that there's an audience that wants to read it. I think that's probably human nature, when it comes down to it.
Yeah. No, you're totally right about that, man. I guess what you just said right there feeds back into, when it comes to motivation and inspiration. The more you're going to these events and interchanging with people and exchanging that energy. Like, I was at NOLA Fest almost a month ago now.
Hmm.
I think I'm still riding off the high of being around hundreds of people that are crazy about literature as much as I am.
Yeah.
Having those author interactions and connections. Like, your next time going to a laptop to write is like, you juiced up, man. I'm not trying to pull from some reservoir somewhere else. Like, I'm still tapped into the energy I felt with those people, exchanging conversation, genuine connections, man. Like, if you are an artist, you got to put yourself in those spaces.
Right. But see, and that also, what they say about, to perfect iron, you have to go through, iron's got to go through fire. When you're out there, and I love this, like when you're out there on the street, I was either sitting at a table on Charters, block from Jackson Square, or I was sitting in a bookstore on Frenchman. But either way, especially when you're out on the street, you may have somebody, you have to really intuit people. You may have somebody that you got 10 seconds of their time, you got a minute of their time. You have to gauge, so in some cases I was giving them 5 words, and sometimes they kept on walking. Sometimes that was like, oh, That's what that is. You know, other people, they essentially wanted like the log line, the 1 to 2 sentence to kind of get the gist of that. Other people would ask different things. So I was like, okay, this is what they're connecting to. But what's great about it is it allows you to see with your work what's connecting with people, you know, and what's connecting with different people. The one thing that I loved, I truly loved, was the range of people that connected to it, you know, and I don't know individually what about it spoke to them, but I found that really cool, you know, and one of, I mean, it everybody, you know, when you sell your books and people like, oh, and they're excited about getting it and they want it signed to them every time, that's, you know, like kid at Christmas. But one of my
Magic.
uh, purchases that made me happy was a lady who was actually in town working with her editor on her next book, and what she writes on. And she's a university press um, author, but is also a professor who writes on Chinese women, modern art, and essentially Eastern philosophy. And that the fact that this is somebody who has that pedigree and resume, then when she saw the book and we talked about it, that she was still interested, that to me was like, oh, wow, that's deep. That's deep. Like that gave me a thumbs up that made me very happy when it came
Yeah,
down to it. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And I want to speak to this about you as an author. I want to definitely speak on this with the business of books once again.
yeah,
In 7 to 8 years doing this literature author thing, and the flood of folks that inbox me and my partner in the chat, Kofi, another fellow writer, publisher, things of that nature. I want to write a book. I want to write a book. I want to write a book. Okay, great. The ones that cross the finish line, which is a small amount of people that actually write the book, they don't do the leg work after that. Like
right,
so, then to get the book in the mail come in the box, right? The book come in the box, you get the book. It's like boom, like that was their finish line. And for some, that's cool. But
right,
the actual boots on the ground that I see you doing on your page, you out there, like I said, 12 hours a day, signing books, talking to people, shaking hands. I'm
right,
sure getting some no's, getting some brush offs, getting some
right.
that boots on the ground work. I don't see as many authors doing that
No,
as you would think,
no.
and
You
that's
know,
needed,
you know what, Sean,
especially being so
take
smart.
that. Most authors don't do that. The
Yeah,
reality is
yeah,
most authors, to be honest, most authors' opinion, when my writing, when my book is done, my work is done to some extent. That's how most people feel.
look what I say. That last punctuation, that last period, whatever it is, that's the beginning.
Right, right,
Like to me, the writing part is the easiest part.
right,
When you finally got that thing in your hand,
right,
like now it's time to work.
right,
Now the real work begins.
right.
Right? Everything before that is just
You make a
that's
really good
it.
point. I think this is something that's key, and this was for me the mental shift that I needed to be where I'm at right now. So when my books were initially published, you know, I'm all excited. Here we go. But then guess what? I find there's no marketing budget, and essentially go back a decade ago, and I was like, well, what do I do? I wasn't on social media at that time. I only got on Facebook. So I was like, well, here we go. I didn't know what to do, and I found, okay, I got kind of a knack for this. But what I also found was, for a lot of authors, it's the romanticized thing is creation, right? Putting something out in the world, a painting, a book, a song, what have you. But plenty of people, and writers among them, in the creative world, at least in New Orleans, look down on the business side and the marketing side of it, of like, oh, that I don't want to dirty my hands with that. I'm just, you know, I just do whatever, and that's fine. I feel like if that's how you feel, promotion, all that, you don't like that self promotion, then hire somebody to do it. But you need to do it, or somebody needs to do it on your behalf. And here's what changed. It made me feel more comfortable with, like, I'm going in. And now at this point, like, oh, I'm headstrong because I know what needs to happen. Is one, I read a Miles Davis quote. To paraphrase, before he was the Miles Davis that we know of, he was just another horn player perfecting his craft. And he said, you know what, back in those days, for every minute I spent practicing my horn, I spent another minute telling someone I was practicing my horn. Miles Davis. Compared to Miles Davis, who are we, right? We wouldn't know of him if he hadn't done that. The other thing, writing specifically, the beat, what they call the beat writers. So Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac on the road, they're coming down to New Orleans. William Burroughs, who literally got busted with drugs in one of the alleys in the French Quarter, was living on the West Bank. So Would we know about them just because, oh, they were good, unique writers? No, there's plenty of good, unique writers. We know about them because Allen Ginsberg was out there hounding people to basically do pieces on them and to label them as a specific writing group because he thought it would be more power that way because their writing was so dissimilar. But William Burroughs is a pretty avant-garde writer. For him to be published at all, it was kind of crazy that he got through somehow. But it took Ginsberg out there basically cheerleading for all those guys. And then the other one, this for me is like, to me, the Renaissance man of our time. I do the I don't know if I prior conversation I mentioned this to you. I do the WWMVPD. What would Melvin Van Peebles do? That's what I operate by, because people think like, oh, he was just really talented to do all this. No, one, he did every time he wanted to. Okay, I'm going to have a book of photography. I'm in Paris. I'm going to use these credits to actually be a filmmaker. I'm in the US. Okay, I'm going to do this and this. He learned on his own. Everything he did on his own. I've got a Substack up about basically his assistant who writes mystery, like kind of Chester Himes-esque mysteries, a guy named Teddy Hayes, who worked for Quincy Jones a little bit, but was Melvin Van Peebles' assistant for about 8 years. And same thing with him. Roberta Flack's people call, we need a stage manager for a world tour. Teddy Hayes barely out of college from Cleveland State. And he's like, well, I've never done that. And Mr. Melvin's like, well, I can show you in a day. Take the job, make all the money from that, save it, because when you come back, you're going to make about a quarter with me, but you're going to learn a lot. You know, he goes to Wall Street. Van Peebles does. He has Teddy come along. Teddy's like, I don't know anything about Wall Street trading. He's like, you want to produce theater? You need to know how money works by being around it and do all that. So you're going to learn. That was his approach. And that's just the way that I think. And I think it's the way you think as well. But what I also appreciate about him is the range. And that's why I say a Renaissance man, the range that he told stories. The man published books. He wrote plays. He had movies made. He was a photographer and a music, like for Sweetback, the soundtrack to that. He found that basically when he's tried to do piano lessons as a kid, the teacher's like, no, this is terrible, quit. And he found what he didn't know at the time as a kid was he was so advanced in his head. Like he was an astronomer as well. So he was, you know, but he was actually working with atonality before that was a thing. And when he first heard Thelonious Monk, it was like, that's what I was doing. And he said he almost broke down because he found that he could have been sort of this musical genius. So when they did the Sweetback soundtrack, he literally, because he couldn't read music, he literally labeled the numbers on a piano for his receptionist's boyfriend's band, which became Earth, Wind, and Fire, and did the soundtrack. He wrote the soundtrack that Earth, Wind, and Fire played on that. He's that guy. So for me, like, I just kind of, for a general guide, especially sometimes when I'm thinking, am I doing too much with this? You know, Van Peebles is my guide. So I don't know if y'all can see, I'm literally wearing my Last Shadow jean jacket, which on the back has the cover. I would not have been doing that if it wasn't for Van Peebles, because I was like, yeah, it's doing a little too much. But I'm like, no, this book is going to be an album drop. It's what MVP would have done.
I love you doing that because my sister-in-law out there in Atlanta, Georgia now, whenever her book came out 7, 8 years ago, the self-help book, right? But she's big on sunflowers and things like that. She literally shaved her head like a low haircut like mine, and she had this artist put the sunflower of her book cover in the back of her head.
Wow.
And I was like, that's a person 1,000% committed
Yeah.
to marketing themselves.
Right.
1,000% commitment to put it in your literal head.
Yes.
But you're right. Wearing the merch. We have our body day Griot. I had it on at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah.
Like wearing your merch, wearing your brand, right? You are the brand.
Right.
Nike, Under Armour, whoever else put their things in our face 1,000 times a day, their logos.
Right.
Why wouldn't I post my stuff 1,000 times a day? You're not posting too much. You're not going live too much.
Right.
These brands don't care about the too much. They just put it in your face. Every other click is an ad. It's an ad. Why wouldn't you do your own product like that? I don't understand.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think for some people, we are in a social media world where there is more of that. But at the same time, I feel like if you believe in what you're about and what you do, it is kind of a natural progression. Now, I will say that once we come to October for release, but once we get, which is pretty close to 6 months out from October, when I can do all this on the behalf of the Walking Blues, the Kalam Yasalam book, it will be kind of fun for me to do this on the behalf of someone else who's also an icon, when it comes down to it. So that's gonna be fun, because that book is, it's going to appeal to not only readers, but anybody that's interested in the Black Arts movement. Well, guess what? He co-started the Black Arts South with Tom Dent. He has been, he was head of Jazz Fest. He's done a lot with activism since the late 60s. The theater that he did, he connects with people in so many ways and has influenced and impacted New Orleans in so many ways. The audience for his book is it feels like just about everybody. But that's going to be fun, because for somebody whose reputation precedes him, then it's just like, wind it up and let it go, for that. So that's what I hope to do. Anything that's not my own work, it's going to be high quality. Here's the thing for me, anybody, whether it was for the cover, for anything that happens with this, I just want to work with the best people, and somebody who does a good job, is reliable, and doesn't charge an arm and a leg, that's reasonable for that. So I'm working with a young man who's an artist who reached out to me. He said, "Hey, you thought about doing, this is for Shadow, you thought about doing a graphic novel or animation or live action with humans?" And I said, "Yeah, this started as a screenplay, but I need to have the right person for it." And he's like, "Well," and I knew him from martial arts. He's in Philly. And he said, "Well, I went to SCAD, and you want to see some of my work?" And it was incredible. And he knows all this stuff. And so what he's put together now, for that, and potentially what either will be used for a pitch or in its own right, to be used, is incredible to me, when it comes down to it. So kind of what for the future of all this, he's, in fact, actually, I can speak on this. He's actually working as we speak. He's doing the cover for Walking Blues. So he'll be doing that. So to me also, if you find good people and hopefully have some level of loyalty, to me, why would you not want to work with the people who do a great job and have done right by you,
And
when it comes down
what
to
is
it?
the see, we keep back to circles. We go in the circles, right? Because back to motivation, inspiration, staying on fire. Whenever you as an artist or creative get connected with another artist or creative, even if it's outside of your genre,
Right.
there is some kind of redemptive quality to, man, that guy's doing good with his martial art thing or whatever he's doing. I'm back to doing. I think about the Harlem Renaissance all the time. Because they speak about the writers of the Renaissance, right? But you had Duke Ellington, these different musicians playing their music. Imagine Langston Hughes watching them playing. Paul Robeson's doing theater and stuff, right?
Right.
Imagine you're a writer, but you're watching that. Wow, he on stage doing this amazing thing. Now I'm motivated in what I'm doing,
Right.
and then my writing is inspiring. This person's doing this thing over here. And it's keep on.
Right.
It's this interconnected circle that they have. That's the magic of it to me.
Right. Well, and especially in some cases, it doesn't always lend itself to it, but in some cases, it works to actually work with somebody that's doing something creative. So that's fun for me, again, because when you go from solitary most of the time for your work, any collaboration with the right people, it's a thrill if somebody gets it, when it comes down to it. I mean, like for example, the guy Kevin who did the cover, all he had to work with was a black and white photo, and the sort of guide to do something that looks like New Orleans in a way nobody's ever seen, which is like the book, and have some very subtle references to Eastern philosophy. That's what he had to work with. The first draft of the cover was different color-wise, and some things had to be tweaked, but essentially the gist of it, with the map, the buildings on the bottom, the little kind of outline of the hexagon from the I Ching, like, it was all there. It just, some things just had to be modified. It was all there in the first place. So to me, when you work well with somebody, that's, you just want to continue that, in some way. And that's the fun thing is as you know, Sean, you put something out into the world, you don't know who's going to latch onto it for whatever reason. And it can always lead to something, but it can't lead to something if it's not out there. And that, what, where you said advice for writer, publisher, whatever, a lot of it is, you just have to do it. You have to stop talking about it. You just have to do it.
Because once again, people say, man, I want to write a book. and that's great. So they go buy all of these courses, right? You buy all the master classes, you buy
Right.
thousands of hours of master class. Okay, that's cool. You go to Amazon, you go to Barnes and Nobles, you buy all these how to write fiction books
Hmm.
and how to whatever books, right? You get all of that. You're doing everything but writing. You go on
Right.
Instagram, you're
Right. Right.
scrolling, you following different art, you're watching things like this, right? Author talks. You're watching all that stuff. You're doing everything but putting your butt in the seat
Right.
and writing.
Right.
Until you put something out there, like you just said, until you put something out there, so there's nothing but doing it. At the
Right.
end of it,
Well,
you already
it's like learning martial arts by a book, not by a class, not with a
it's
human.
nothing like sparring. So
Yeah.
you get punched in the face.
Right.
It's just theory.
Right.
It's theory until the punch, right? And now you know, oh, that don't work. Okay,
Right.
that
Right.
sounded good in class, but yeah.
Right.
So um, to end this, so wrap this up at the end, put a
Yeah.
nice little bow on it. Tell the family what you're doing with the Last Shadow. Besides the book, you mentioned screenplay. You're doing some other things as well, correct?
Right. I mean, so the book came out on the 26th. So actually, tomorrow, so we're recording this on the 15th of April. Tomorrow on the 16th, the book will have been out 3 weeks. I had to look at
3 weeks.
a calendar. I had to look at a calendar because I was blown away because it felt like much longer because everything has been packed.
Yeah.
So there's still events going on. Some of them are in New Orleans, but now also going to Jefferson Parish, going to Slidell, to St. Tammany, going to West Bank, to Algiers. So now some of those are starting to happen with things. I am hoping to have another little trip across the U.S., but that's not official yet. But look for something else to be coming to probably North Carolina, but definitely to New York on November 9th for the Urban Action Showcase. That one's 40th anniversary of Last Dragon. They're also, by the way, going to have, because it's a 50th, they're going to have some of the original cast from Good Times are going to be there. So it's mostly martial arts action, but they do have um, uh, some drama. So they're going to be there as well. But really, what I look at for the next step on the book is it's just continue to kind of get the word out. I am looking at taking, so there's 39 chapters and a few more scenes in that, is essentially take something that was a screenplay and also on page, is how can that be done well on stage, which means, changing some scenes, maybe pulling out some B story kind of thing and a few characters, but keep the essence of that whole thing. So that's something that I'm going to be working on. Essentially, the thing is, if you have an idea that you believe in, is what are the different forms that organically and naturally work for that? And I don't mean, Sean and I were talking about this the other day. I don't mean fill in the blank Spider-Man 72. I don't mean that. I mean taking a purely good, genuine idea and just finding ways. Because the fun thing about this for anybody writing is it really keeps you on your toes and keeps you nimble, because there's some things that you can do on the screen that you can't do on the page, and some things on the page you can't do on the stage, and there's some things you can do on the stage that you can't do in a graphic novel. So the fun thing for me is it's all different versions of the same book. So although I'm kind of a little itching to get started on the second one, I'm also no hurry. If that doesn't happen this year, I'm not bothered. I'm not mad about that at all, because all these other things that can happen with the book, I love it. I love it. So I
And
just I just want,
now,
because you know what, it's also a different audience. There may be some
yeah,
people that read more
yeah,
graphic novels and not print books, and all of a sudden,
yeah,
boom, this is something they're seeking. There's
yeah.
maybe somebody like, I don't really read, but this hits the screen and it's exactly what they're looking for. So
Because
ultimately, that's appealing to different people.
you and I discussed it in private in the chat. I was talking about the example of the Rich Dad Poor Dad series, right? A lot of folks know about that particular financial book, financial
Right.
literacy book. But you got Rich Dad Poor Dad for kids. You got
Right.
Rich Dad Poor Dad for moms. You got Rich Dad Poor Dad for entrepreneurs. Then you got the game Cash Flow. It's actual game, kind of remind you of Monopoly, if you will.
Right.
That's based on Rich Dad. So it's all these different iterations off of that one project.
Right.
I love whenever they do that. And I'm always telling my author friends about that.
Right. I mean, I think the key thing is you got to get the idea. But then once you have something solid, is don't be so quick to let it go of like, oh well, I can come up with a bunch of other ideas too. Well, guess what? Like, there are only so many, whether it's titles, whether it's concepts, whatever. Even though in some ways it feels like everything has been done, guess what? If you go to Amazon, look up The Last Shadow and see what else is out there. The only other book is actually, I think, two. There's Orson Scott Card, who does sort of sci-fi stuff. It's one of his last books, so it's not even the same genre, and the book wasn't even received very well. And there might even be some D&D, obscure D&D kind of like card game book thing. Other than that, nobody used the title, which is crazy to me. So guess what? There are titles, there are concepts that people have not done already, So the thing is, when you have it, and also when you see that it's connecting with people, then it's what are you going to do with it? But it's like you said, once the period is done with the end of the story, that's where it begins at that point.
Time to work. Time
Yeah,
to work, man.
time to work. That's the ethos of this whole talk. Time to work. Yeah.
Circle. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Man, I totally appreciate your time, your energy, your effort. You are an exemplary person in the art world as far as working it, doing the work, doing the craft, man. Like, I'm always give you credit and props for that. And I'm gonna tell other artists, I'm gonna point towards your page, like, man, look at him, look
Thank
what
you.
he's doing, look how he's doing it. Like, I'm gonna definitely
Appreciate
point
that.
towards you, like, that's the way to do it. You're an indie author, especially. That's
Yeah.
the way to do it.
Yeah.
Right?
You know what?
I appreciate you.
Yeah.
So in closing, tell the family, where do they find the Last Shadow?
You know what? So anybody that's in, actually, I was gonna say in New Orleans, but any area, if you're near a bookstore, if they don't have it, they can special order it. Special order just means you're getting it from the distributor, same as the new books that came out that week. So anybody can get it. If you're in, we talk about food deserts, but if you're in a book desert, an area there's just not a bookstore around, you can easily get it through Amazon, or you can also get the Kindle version from Amazon. And this, by the way, for all this is anywhere in the world. So if you're watching this, you can get the book. If you hit my IG, which is just Micheal Allen Zell, the full name on that, I post different events as they're coming up, or if there's a bunch of them clustered over a week or two, then I do a little graphic for that. If you come to one of those, then I'm happy to sign a book and inscribe it personally, for any of that. For the time being, it comes with a free poster on top of that. So,
Nice.
yeah,
Nice.
and say that. So I'm out, I'm around, and it's great to talk shop. Some of these things we touched on before. Some of these things were fresh in all this. But either way,
What?
I feel like here's a phrase. This is a phrase that came to mind from a conversation that we had a few days ago. I don't know if in my mind it just came to me, if you said it, if I read it, if it's the name of a book. But what came to me was the idea of, you got to put the muscle in the hustle. Some people think they're doing the hustle, but not really. But you got to put the muscle in the hustle fully, and treat what you create the same as, I mean, it's a job to some extent, and it's not always fun and it's glorious, and you're not always going to get a yes. But if you believe in what you're doing, then it makes it all worth it, when it comes down to it. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very, very much for your time. And coming down to the Sean P. experience. Whenever book number 2 comes around, you're always welcome back to be a guest on the show once again. I would love to support and promote your work, my man. And with that being said, thanks for the audience. Thanks for the chat, giving the comments in the chat. I'm always appreciative of those that take the time to tap into the show. And on Thursday at 4 o'clock p.m., have my next guest up, The Black Candle Women, the next book, Black Candle Women, Thursday show. Don't miss it, the Sean P. experience. Peace.